So, of course, I had to play a bit with the wording because NNHAR is North American Heritage at Risk, and I'm just moving a bit further north and taking it to North Norwegian Heritage at Risk. And what I'm going to present to you today is, oh, Sarah's playing now. Great. Results from field work and observations made in the CULTCOAST project. And the reason why we only call it CULTCOAST, and that's all I'm going to tell you for the rest of today, is that the full title is Cultural Heritage Sites in Coastal Landscapes, or coastal areas, monitor, manage and preserve sites and landscapes under climate change and development pressure. So that's quite a mouthful, and thus just using CULTCOAST. And this is an interdisciplinary project with 2 archaeologists, 2 architects, 2 geographers and 2 geologists, one of whom is doubling up as a climate scientist. And we come from different Norwegian research institutes and universities, plus Tom Dawson from St Andrews University in Scotland. And our reference group includes local, regional and national heritage authorities and international universities and heritage management agencies. And all of those are both stakeholders and beneficiaries of the project, which means we basically share all our findings with them as soon as we can. And just to make sure that we all know where we are, if you look at in the top left-hand corner, you'll see the blue circle there, that's the Arctic Circle, the cross basically marking the North Pole. And then just if you look further at the map, you'll see that the Svalbard Islands are closer to the North Pole than they are to Oslo, though they do belong to Norway. And you'll also see that Oslo is about the height of southern Alaska. So, so it's only the northern part of Alaska and Canada, Greenland, just touching Iceland and northern parts of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia that are within the Arctic Circle. It's not really a circle, it wiggles around a bit, but it's easier to make a circle on the map. And for the CULTCOAST research project, running from 2019 until 2023, we have chosen 4 case sites, just 4, but there are limits to what you can do within a 4-year project. So we've got 2 in the Svalbard Islands and 2 on the island of Andøya, which is connected by bridge to mainland Norway. But as you'll see, it's really almost in the Norwegian Sea. So the red stars mark our case sites. And in Svalbard, we've got the mining site of Yorktown, just across from the only town in Svalbard, Longyearbyen, and named from the American Longyear who established a mine there. And Russeskjæla, the hunting station, which is a Russian hunting station. I'll get back to that a little bit later, which is at the rim of the ice fjord with only the Greenland Sea as the closest neighbor. We carried out field work in Svalbard in 2019 and some again in 2020. And then the Andøya field work was carried out in June this year, postponed 1 year because of the pandemic. And also because of the pandemic, we had a rather reduced staff also this year. And the sites at Andøya, Stav and Høyvika are both medieval settlement mounts. So if we go first to Svalbard and the site of Russeskjæla, which is at the mouth of the Linné River and the brink of the ice fjord, and then just the Greenland Sea further to the west. It's one of the largest archaeological sites of this kind, with several house remains, a large cemetery, and foundations for large crosses connected to the cemetery. And it was settled by the Russian Pomor people in around 1700, and they stayed there for about 150 years till the mid-19th century. And they hunted walrus, furred animals, and they gathered eider down, and they fished and just did practically everything to exploit the resources at the site. The main site is on the eastern bank of the Linear River, which is what is closest to us in these photos, but there are also house remains on the western bank. The coastal erosion isn't terribly dramatic here, but there are risks of landslides from the hills behind the site. And although these photos are only 6 years apart, the wood has degraded quite a lot further, and the river mouth has moved, lots of materials, and the hill on the western bank has freshly eroded surfaces. So you'll see the photos here are taken from slightly different angles towards the house, but taken so that as much as possible of the western bank would look the same in the photos. And if you look closer at the Russian hunting cabin on the western bank, you'll see that parts of it has already disappeared on the slope. The stone here is a cornerstone in the house, and these really fragile remains of wood are what's left of the walls. So not a lot to see. And if you look also in this photo, I put in the red lines as aids for you to see. The circles are around remains of posts, roof-bearing posts, and then you just have this really fragile wood lying around. And if you look at the top right-hand photo, see my colleague Anne-Katrine Fluen, the house is not really very big. It's just a hunting cabin. But what we see here is that wind erosion and gravity really are the worst threats to this site at this point, because if you look at the slope towards the beach in the left-hand photo, you'll see that it's really mostly sand and gravel there. So no hard, firm materials. And this is an area that used to be frozen permanently most of the year, perhaps defrosting for a month or two in the height of summer. But now it's mainly frozen only for a month or two at the height of winter, and the rest of the year it's not. So that's the reduction, the thawing of permafrost is really one of the largest threats to these sites. Plus tourism. In 2020, a sub-project to CULTCOAST called GeoCult went out there. So 3 of our project partners, Lena and Chris and Knut, went out to look at the sites again. And when they arrived at the house on the western slope, they found an orange peel lying in the middle of the house. And just to let you know the difference, when we were there, none of us dared step inside the house remains. We were walking carefully on the outside. But here, tourists had used this slight depression overlooking the fjord really beautifully to have a break, eat an orange and leave the peel lying there. This really demonstrates the problems of communicating that this is a listed heritage site that should be treated with care and respect. There are no signposts there. there's very limited public information unless you check the National Heritage Database before you set out on your hike. And most people visiting will not know what is there. And in 2019, we found deposits eroding out of the bank at the estuary. And because we found both knitted and woven textile and wood and 1 or 2 nails, we fear that this might be a grave that was slowly coming out of the section. And stratigraphy and location indicate that this might even be earlier than the 18th century burial site, which is on the other side of the river. However, there is more to this story that first met the eye. And the next year, the same year as the lemon peel, they discovered that much more of these deposits had come out in the section, much more was visible, a longer part of the section, and found boat nails, wood, and lots more. And the geologists and geographers who were the ones on the site, they could not distinguish between animal bones and human bones, so they still thought this might be a grave, and alerted the Svalbard Governor's Office, which is the only one that has any authority to excavate in Svalbard. Even as a research project visiting, we were not allowed to even just pick up stuff that was on the beach and send it in for radiocarbon dating. We told them we were willing to pay for it, but they told us, no, hands off, strictly our business. But our emergency call did alert them, and they went on site investigating it. And if you see the red arrow here, that's where the deposit photos you just saw were. And up here are the remains of a Norwegian hunting cabin. And the Russian one is just outside of the slide here. So if you look up here, you'll see that this is where it is. Can you see my mouse cursor now when I'm moving it around?
I don't right now.
No, just as big.
Oh, yes, now I see it.
Now you see it. Okay, good. This is where the house is. What they did find were exposed ammunition shells and lots of animal bones, and lots more of textile fragments and wood and boat nails lying around there. And that showed that this was a buried refuse deposit from the late 19th century. And that really demonstrates the speed of coastal erosion here, so that between 50 and 70 centimeters of deposits have been moved around in 100 years, covering up this deposit. It's basically a mitten that's just been covered up by erosion. And just to recap the overview here, so the red circles mark the settlement sites. So the one on the edge here, that's the Russian hunting cabin, the one that's practically falling into the ocean now. This is the Norwegian hunting cabin, that's a bit later. And then over here is the main settlement and also the main cemetery. And the cabin that you see here, that's really just a ruin, but these two are functioning. And funnily enough, actually, the one I'm pointing at now is Norwegian owned, and the one behind is owned by the Russians. So this is a multicultural site. still. Because of the permafrost, graves in Svalbard were typically dug as far into the active layer, the layer that was thawed, as they possibly could. And then they piled lots of stones on top to keep out Arctic fox and polar bears. So piles of stones really mark graves here. And what we have been doing is trying to measure certain graves to check for sulfluction processes. And we're measuring the river estuary to see the changes happening there, because they happen really quite fast and continuously. And some of our colleagues were there even this August measuring again. But if we move to the next site, then that's the Yorktown mining site. This is just to put you back in the map and where it is, across from the only town in Svalbard, Longyearbyen. And all the yellow markings you see are listed heritage. Some of them are just wooden trackways, some are remains of cables running from the mine to the cableway station, and some are cabins or residential barracks that were used during the mining period. So this site is quite interesting because originally from 1903 to 1908, many of the buildings here, the residential buildings at least, were actually placed further away, further out in the fjord, not this close to Longyearbyen, at a place called Advent City, which was the first mine there. But then in 1917, the buildings and machinery were all moved to what's today called Yorktown. That basically means they must have done it during winter, where they could slide it over the ice, because otherwise it would have been completely hopeless to move this amount of materials over that longer distance. And the mines were only run for a very short period until 1921, and then a few years of sporadic use. And then there was a new mining attempt from 1938 to 1940 during the Second World War. But then afterwards it was abandoned. And the interesting thing about Svalbard is that all remains up until and including the Second World War are automatically listed, which basically means that people have a really hard time telling what is heritage and what is not. So I usually tell them, if it's plastic, it's not listed. If it's not, consider it as listed. There are more than 20 larger buildings preserved here, and additionally, a few cabins and modern holiday homes have been put up at the site in later years. And because of the proximity to the town, this makes this a good site to use as a study site for a source of to study wear and tear caused by tourism and modern use. And this is then Longyearbyen seen from Yorktown. And if you look at the town, see there are two glaciers that are just moving in on the town, or actually they're moving away because of climate change. The town holds 2,400 permanent residents. If you look at the cruise ship here, that brought about 3,500 passengers plus a crew of about 700, which means that they brought about twice the amount of people actually living there just in one cruise ship. And cruise ship tourism has been huge in Svalbard. It's been going down because of the pandemic, and there's been a change also because Norwegian and Svalbard environmental laws try to prohibit the use of heavy fuel oil, which the cruise ships really rely on. So that means that in the future, we expect smaller cruise ships to come to the islands. That then may create a different problem, because that will allow the ships to be able to land at much more sites than the large ones can, and thus endangering, possibly endangering heritage at more sites. So if we go back to the beach now and some of the remains there, just to demonstrate the rapidity of change here. If you look in the bottom right corner, see that photo was taken in 2011. And then if you look to the left, that photo was taken in 2019. And only the steam engine lying on top here is now visible on the beach. And this is really a beach where lots of things are happening at the same time, because here you've got accretion of material, and further down you've got really rapid erosion. So lots of processes going on at the same time, and all of them in different ways threatening the heritage site. And again here, the loss of permafrost is really the main problem. And if we add to that the past winters have been so mild that there's no ice on the fjord, there's no sea ice, or hardly any. That means that if there is a storm, then there's nothing to break its path. It just comes straight into these soft, sandy materials. And here you see the fjord is completely still. There's hardly a wave here, but if there is a storm, the waves will reach the top of the cableway central, which is quite a few meters high. And before, that would not have been a problem, because the land itself would have been frozen and there would have been protective ice on the fjord. So the waves would never reach land or reach the buildings. But with the state of climate change now, the deposits are unfrozen most of the year, and there is no protective ice. We also have solifluction processes going on the slopes because of the loss of permafrost. So there are lots of things going on at the same time. I deliberately put the arrow here just to indicate that the mine is quite much further up in the mountain. But you've got the intermediary station here and the cableway station, and just remember these when we go to the next slide, because those two arrows indicate the cableway station on the beach and the intermediary station. And you can probably see the black line here. That's just coal that's been tipped out when the cable was running down from the intermediate station to the large cableway station on the beach. And you can see here that we've divided the beach into sectors, and well, we could have added one here, sector 0, made that sector 1. That's where the accretion is really the most. That's where the steam engine is lying around. But then we've got the next bits here where stuff is happening as well. So we've been looking at shoreline movement, and you can see the darker red or orange. It is the more erosion is going on, and the greenest parts are where accretion or build-up is happening. So you can see here that the sectors 1 and 2 are really, they're the ones in the enlargement to the right. So they're the ones where most of the stuff is happening. And we even studied, well, old shorelines and looking at trying to predict how fast the shoreline would retire within the next 10 and 20 years. And if that does happen, then within 20 years, the large building, the cableway station, will end up being underwater. The problem is that things were happening a lot faster than we even thought. So if you look at these photos, so the top ones are from 2019 and the bottom ones from 2020, and you can see hexagons and circles marking approximately the same, or actually exactly the same markers over those 2 years. And you'll see that there's been quite a lot happening with the coastline. There are fresh erosion cuts, and lots of the wood in the water has been washed away, and the shoreline has just moved a couple of meters further inland just within 1 year. So it's we've got high erosion rates and a very dynamic coastline. And what do we do to preserve a site like this? We preserve it digitally. As you can see here, we made a 3D model with photogrammetry in completing it. There's been even more work done on that right now. The small building down here to the left, that's a smithy. And because last year the shoreline had moved so far inland that it was only half a meter from the walls of this smithy, the governor of Svalbard have actually decided to move this building about 10 meters inland. But the big structure, the cableway station, that's not just moved very easily. I mean, the smithy is a small, lightweight structure building. This is heavy timbers designed to be able to receive large loads of coal coming from the mine and then being loaded onto boats to carry it away from the site. And if we look at this photo that I just got last week, that's from 1981. You can see the beach isn't anywhere near the cableway station. So from 1981 to 1921, the beach has been reduced by at least, I would say, approximately 30 meters, moved further inland. And that's quite a lot, and much more than anybody had expected. So right now, the beach is approximately here, if you can still see my cursor. And in June, they tried to put out sandbags to temporarily protect the coast just here from further erosion, just until they could actually find out what to do with this building. And some colleagues of mine have been up there just a month ago, really short days. Now it's dark there, and well, there's no coverage as well, but it's almost polar night now. And the days were about, the working days where they could actually see the building properly enough to scan it and photograph it, were about 4 hours. each day. And that's what's been done now, because we told them that if you do nothing, then the next big storm may actually wash away the foundations of the building so that it will collapse and gradually fall into the water. So right now they are trying their best to protect it. We are trying to monitor the speed of change there, both by the physical measurements, repeated measurements. We've taken drone photos, and we've installed a Campbell Scientific Soil View probe. It's 5 centimeters in diameter and 1 meter deep, and measures at 10 different levels going down, measures humidity and temperature and conductivity. So here you see the installation. It's 1 year later than we applied for, but we had to demonstrate to the governor first how fast the processes were happening here, because otherwise they said, no, you can't install anything here because this is a listed site. So yeah, but this listed site is disappearing faster than you can say boo. So a 5 centimeter diameter hole should not cause the greatest problem. Apparently it still did. So we got the permit after the snow had fallen, and then we had to wait until the snow disappeared again before we actually could make the installation. So here you see the hole after it was hand augered, and actually they met permafrost 95 centimeters down and couldn't get the last 5 centimeters down. So the probe is sticking up a bit and was protected with stones around it. And the large box holds the battery and the whole machinery to transmit. And then there is a mast, which you'll see in the next slide, which is a radio transmitter using the cell phone network, sending signals so that I can sit here in my home in southern Norway and log on to the site and check the soil temperature on 9 different levels. And if you think it looks tall, it's because Lena, who's the scale model in the photo, is only 1 meter and 55 centimeters tall. So she is short and it's not that tall. But if you look at the risks to the station, we've got the snowmobiles that are active in winter, and that's the reason why the reflective flag was on the mast. And we've got curious polar bears. And just after Lena and Andy had installed the logger station, they went for a walk a bit further down the coastline, and they found these. Just look at the size of these paws and compared to Lena's hand. I mean, she doesn't have very big hands, but they're about the same size as mine. And then just consider that the polar bear prints are at least 4 times the size of her hand. Way too fresh for my liking. So I'm just glad that it walked that way, which is away from where they had been working and not towards them. So if you look at the long-term monitoring results, like I said, we've got this website where I can log in from anywhere in the world and check the status of the measurements. And here I just piled all the measurements so far on top of one slide, which means that you can't make heads or tails of any of it. But if you look at just temperature measurements, and just to tease you, I put them in centigrades here. And then to help you, I put them in Fahrenheit. So basically moving from around 0 up to 52, 53 degrees Fahrenheit. And 0 is around -18 in centigrades, and that means that the plus 52.5 is around 11 degrees, which is what the temperature, outside temperature, is here right now at the moment. And then if we look at the water content, don't be too surprised at this huge dune spike. This is what happens when the snow finally melts. So the snow this summer did not melt until June. And then, of course, the moisture content is dropping again. And then it will rise next summer when the snow is melting. But I think it's already covered in snow again now. So you see that there is quite a drop here when we enter November. And that is because, and there's nothing going on in the bottom measurements. That's because it's frozen. So you don't get any readings from frozen water. So only the top probe is really measuring now. So the water content is going down really far because snow is covering it now. And I'm quite glad to see actually that the bottom ones are frozen now, because that's much better than it was last year, where we had measurements almost all the time because the temperatures didn't go down that far. See that there is a slight gap around February where the temperatures did go down. So our next sites are a bit further south, but still north of the Arctic Circle at Andøya. And just to confuse you, the map to the right has north pointing upwards, the photo has north pointing downwards. But the red arrows are marking our sites, our case sites, and the red circle is the campsite where we're staying. As you can see, we've deliberately chosen sites simply from their natural beauty. And here you've got the yellow buildings here that are on a small spit moving into the fjord and practically on the beach. That's one farm mount. And as you can see to the right, even here we installed the same type of probe as we did on Svalbard. We got the permit a lot quicker here, so we were able to install it in one go when we're doing the field work. And because this is further south, we also added solar panels on top to prolong the battery life, because the battery in the Svalbard station has to be fed 3 times a year. We have to just repower the batteries there. But here we are hoping that with the aid of solar power, it can actually keep going for at least 1 year without needing any kind of extra aid, and still keep the measurements ticking in. The second site, which is also a medieval settlement map, but with more recent houses on top. The yellow one was, of course, from late 19th century, and the houses that you see here are mostly 18th century. Well, there's one that's 19th century, but 2 of them are 18th century. And this is a site which is really dramatic and difficult to access. You either have to cross the pass here, as Knut and Hans are doing, going down to the beach and then along the beach, and the houses you see in the other photo are over here. So that's that house over here. or you have to come by boat. And we tried both. And it's not just the hike down. To get to that part, you have to hike up first. And you can't even see the pass over here, but it's basically like this one. So up and then down, the same type of slope on the other side. So what we need to do is look at ways to evaluate our sites, looking at all the possible threats to continued preservation. And we need to define threshold levels for when a site moves into a category where we risk losing the ability to interpret the remains. Because that's what we want to do as archaeologists. We want to be able to interpret the past activities. And if deposits are too compressed or too twisted around, distorted by soil movement, then it gets really, really difficult to interpret the past events. So that's why we need something like this, deciding, okay, we're expecting that future archaeologists have even better methods to investigate things than we do. That's been proving a fact in the past. But with climate change happening, when do we reach the tipping point so that it's not getting better? We're actually losing it. We're losing the information. So we lose the site value. And that is something that we have to do all the time for each and every site. There are lots of different thread evaluations that you can do. This is just some suggestions I made, all of them concerning medieval settlement mounts. But you can have whatever you want in here and just try and look at it. Okay, is it threatened by development or new use? Is there erosion? Does the temperature change? Has the precipitation changed? In Norway, there's been a lot of change from snow to rainfall instead. That's not really a Floridian problem, I know, but if you move a bit further north, even in the American world, you do get snow. As archaeologists, we always hate doing exactly that. We hate putting value on a site and we hate putting numbers to things, because then somebody might come back in 5 years or 10 years and tell us we were completely wrong. I still believe that we have to do it. So in 2016, I published this traffic light. Nobody has seemed to want to remark on it. I haven't seen any references to it or any use of it anywhere except my own, because it tends to scare the crap out of us, excuse my language, that we put numbers on things. And if everything is in the red zone, I mean, I'm not even sure these numbers are the right ones. That needs to be tested and adjusted and measured, and they may differ from area to area. What happened is just that change of soil moisture content, change of surface damage, temperature changes, decay rates, loss by continued use or loss by new use. They are all things that we can relate to most of our sites, no matter where they are in the world. And it's just a question of, okay, where is the limit between it being in the green zone? Okay, in the yellow zone, maybe not so good, maybe we should monitor, or in the red zone where the site is actually physically threatened from continued preservation. So just to provoke you into thinking and doing all the things that we are actually, being from the humanities and social sciences, we hate doing, which is putting numbers on things. We can also help evaluate the state of sites using the dive method used here. just describing, interpreting, evaluating, and enabling intervention. Or we can use any number of different systems. We all have different systems, and there's nothing wrong with those as long as we use them actively. But we've reached a time when the traffic light of preservation is rarely green, but mostly yellow or red. And that's not just in Northern Norway, but that's on a global scale. So we need a paradigm shift allowing for documentation, excavation, and protection on site through adaptation or accepting loss of sites. And since 2009, I've actually been using it a couple of years before because I was in the development group of it. We have in Norway used a Norwegian standard with a preservation scale going from 1 to 5. And I tried to get this published in a serious British publication channel. And they told me, you can't call anything lousy. And I had to tell them that, well, sorry, that term was coined by my Scottish colleague who doesn't really care about language use. He just described it as he saw it. And it's in the standard. But right now, as we speak, there is a suggested European standard where the scale is changed from 5 to 4, and we've cut out lousy and excellent. And just also because people who were uncertain about defining the state of preservation, they would tend to lump anything into the medium category just because they thought that, okay, then I'm not doing anything wrong. It's medium well preserved. So, but if you have 4 categories, you have to choose whether it's well preserved or poorly preserved. And then if it's very good or very poor. And if this can be applied in multilinguistic and multicultural Europe, we're talking about application in at least 32 different countries. I really can't see why it should not be possible to apply the same type of system, or the same system indeed, exactly the same system on a global scale. And I know that some of you have said, well, there are different state laws. Yeah, well, there are certainly different laws in all of the European countries. And even in a country like Germany, every state there also has its own Heritage Act. So I don't think that the United States are that different in the political complexities compared to all the European countries. You do have the advantage that you can usually stick with just a couple of languages and not around 30 different ones. And before I end, but I would like to discuss that with you, I'll just make a quick plug for the World Archaeological Congress, which would be in Prague next year. On Monday, the session proposal submission deadline is, and then on 3rd of January, you can put in abstracts for presentations or posters. And that ends then on March 21st. And then the conference itself is going to be in early July. And I know for a fact that it's going to be a hybrid conference because of continued worries about the pandemic. And Sarah A.S. Rigsby, Ellie Graham and myself have a session there, and you are more than welcome. This has already been approved because this conference was going to be held in 2020, and we actually got our abstract approved then. And we have just been allowed to adjust it a little bit now before the deadline. And you are more than welcome to submit a poster wallpaper abstracts for this. And of course, there's also going to be another EAA meeting next year. It's going to be in Budapest, late August, early September. So we're staying in Central Europe, first in the Czech Republic and then Hungary. And there is a call for sessions that's been extended to Monday midnight, and of course there will be another roundtable session for the Community of Climate Change and Heritage. However, I have not submitted any other session abstracts because I'm trying to concentrate on the World Archaeological Congress, but I'm sure there will be other climate change related sessions at the EAA as well. There were quite a few in the previous conference.